Hello everyone and happy Friday. I'm Nitsahone, and each and every Friday I bring you guys another MTG Top 10. A couple of weeks ago I did a Top 10 on a specific card type, planeswalkers, and it made me want to do some more card type based Top 10s. Now the other card types are way more work to research than planeswalkers. For example, there are over 1,000 sorceries in Magic's existence, so this won't be the kind of theme that I can do week in and week out until I'm done with it, but at some point I'll get around to doing each and every card type. So for today, that brings us to sorceries. For this video, I delved deep into the records of Magic the Gathering Premier Play, that is, ProTours and Grand Prixs, to uncover the sorceries in Magic's history that have put up the best results in these events. In other words, the order of this list is determined by how well a card did or is doing at these type of events. Cards receive points depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they received, with a Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as many points. The cards on this list are organized based on this score, with the card at number 1 having the highest score. Before we get started, let me know in the comments what you think will prove to be the number 1 card on this list, and we'll see if you are right. Before we get started with the list, I did want to include a couple of honorable mentions who have the disadvantage of not being legal in any Premier Play format once the Pro Tours and Grand Prix emerged, but given the fact that they are 2 sorceries in the Power 9, they are undoubtedly the most powerful sorceries in Magic's history, at least in a vacuum. They need to be mentioned in a video like this one. And those 2 cards are, of course, Time Walk and Time Twister, which are both absurdly powerful. Time Walk is fairly straightforward. For 2 mana, you get an extra turn. We know today that extra turn is one of the most powerful combinations of words in Magic, as it gives you an absurd advantage over your opponent. These days, we don't get effects that give extra turns for less than 5 mana. Time Twister is also very powerful. It causes both players to shuffle their graveyard and hand into their library and draw 7 cards. While symmetrical, the fact that the person who casts it gets the first crack at the hand of new cards gives the caster the advantage. They are part of the Power 9 for a reason, and are probably both more powerful than all of the cards on this list. Now, let's go ahead and get into our top 10. At number 10, with a score of 77, we have the only card on the list that is still in Standard right now, and that is Declaration in Stone. It sees play in a lot of decks because it is such an efficient removal spell. For 2 mana, it can kill just about anything, and if your opponent has multiple copies of the same creature, it can kill all of them. It does, of course, have the downside of giving your opponent clue tokens, but the general plan is that your opponent won't have time to use them anyway because you'll kill them fast enough that they don't have time to cash them in. It has seen play in a variety of decks running white, ranging from Bant Company to green-white tokens to mono-white humans, and right now it is featured in the blue-white flash decks that are one of the more dominant decks in Modern. Worth noting that it actually saw a lot more play in its earlier days in Standard before vehicles, especially Smuggler's Copter, came into Standard, and people began favoring instant speed removal a little bit more. That said, it likely will climb higher on this list before it rotates out of Standard because it's still got a long time to be in it. At number 9, coming in with just 1 more point than Declaration in Stone at 78, we have Anger of the Gods. This card was an incredibly common sideboard card when it was in Standard, as it was incredibly good against any aggro decks in its format. It did pick up a few top 8s in the main board of more controlling decks, such as Rakdos Control, Jeskai Control, and Blue-Red Control. Anger of the Gods has also built a name for itself in Modern, though, where it is a key main deck card at times in Jund, Scapeshift, and Valakut decks. Since these decks are weak to aggressive starts, this card serves to make the game last even longer. It has become even more commonly played in recent months, thanks to Dredge becoming even more powerful after the release of Kaladesh, and it is one of the best cards you can cast against a Dredge deck, as it kills most of their creatures and makes sure they never come back. Anger of the Gods will likely continue to build on its resume, thanks to being a great card in the current Modern format. At number 8, we have one of the most iconic cards in Magic's history, Wrath of God, with 84 points. The original board sweeper, destroy all creature effects, are referred to as Wraths in reference to this card. It's been around since Magic began and has been printed several times, giving it a lot of chances in Standard. Anytime it is in Standard, it is a much beloved card by Control players, since it does what it does so efficiently. It first burst onto the scene way back in 1994 in the deck that won Worlds that year, Esper Control, though people at the time didn't call it that, it was just black, white, blue control to them. It was then played in countless other control decks throughout Magic's history, including decks like Gauzy Glare, Astral Slide, Revelark, Tron, and Oath of Druids. In addition to an impressive and long-lasting Standard resume, the card continues to see play in Modern, where it is currently showing up in Nahiri control decks, Scapeshift, Blue-White Control, and the relatively new Sun and Moon decks, picking up a top 8 earlier this year in Modern. When Extended was around, it also saw play there, in the oppressive prison decks such as John Finkel's Finkel Prison and Scepter Chant. It also used to see play in Legacy, in the Stoneblade and Countertop decks, though it hasn't picked up a top 8 there since 2012. While Wrath continues to build its resume, it has slowed down considerably, though I hope it will continue to do enough to remain on this list. At number 7, with 87 points, we have Maelstrom Pulse. You may have noticed that so far all of the cards on this list are removal of one kind or another. Not too much of a surprise, since that is frequently what sorceries are, and they frequently represent the most powerful removal in standard formats. Since they are sorcery speed, they are usually allowed to do a lot more than their instant counterparts. Maelstrom Pulse is another highly efficient removal spell. For 3 mana you can destroy any non-land permanent, so it's flexible too, and not only that, but it kills other cards with the same name as that permanent. Unlike many of the other cards on this list, Maelstrom Pulse did not do the most work in Standard though. Don't get me wrong, it did do work there, putting up 4 Pro Tour top 8s and more than a dozen Grand Prix top 8s, appearing primarily in Jund decks, but it has done most of its work in Modern, being an important card in most builds of the Modern version of Jund, and it continues to perform well there. Pulse is so powerful, it even makes it into some Legacy decks, such as Jund, again, as well as Shardless Bug. When Extended existed, it put up some high finishes there too, once again, in Jund decks. As long as Jund is viable in a format, you're probably going to see Maelstrom Pulse. At number 6, with 90 points, we have Supreme Verdict. The second Wrath effect on our list. Supreme Verdict does the exact same thing Wrath does, although creatures can regenerate from it, but it can't be countered. That clause is a pretty big deal. Verdict was so strong in Return to Ravnica block constructed that it took down 5 of the top 8 slots at Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, a block constructed Pro Tour. It is, of course, also saw play in a ton of standard control decks too, appearing in blue-white control and Esper control the most. It is no stranger to Modern either, showing up in various control decks such as blue-white control and Jeskai control, getting Grand Prix top 8s as recently as last month. At number 5, with 94 points, we have our first card that isn't a removal spell, and a card that is a representative of a group of cards that many consider to be one of Wizards' biggest design mistakes ever, and that is Phyrexian Mana. These cards all allow you to choose to play the card for free. Yes, you do have to pay life, but come on, you can put this card in any color deck, and that's sort of what makes it sort of a design mistake in a lot of people's point of view. As a result, many of these Phyrexian Mana cards see play in a lot of formats and in a lot of decks, and Gitaxian Probe is one of these. Seemingly an innocuous effect, Probe allows you to find out what is in your opponent's hand while also allowing you to draw a card. Basically, if you run 4 of these in your deck, you have a 56-card deck, making your deck more consistent and allowing you to gain important information. Probe sees play everywhere it is legal, including in block, where it appeared in a mono-black Infect deck. Probe is particularly good in decks that like going all in on one creature, like Infect, because it allows you to see if you should be casting all your spells to pump your Infect creature to kill your opponent or not, since if your opponent has a way of killing your guy, you probably shouldn't be doing it. In Standard, it has appeared in a wide variety of decks, because as I noted, it allows you to make your deck more consistent, with upside. This included aggro decks, including the Tribal Illusion deck, and it also included more controlling decks like Delver. In Modern, it has seen play in a wide variety of decks as well, including Infect decks, where it is used much the same way as it was in Block, to ensure that the path is clear for you to kill your opponent, as well as decks like Pyromancer, Ascension, and before it got banned, Splinter Twin. More recently, Probe has become even crazier in the Death Shadow Zoo decks. These decks make Probe even more amazing because they look to lower their life to make their Death Shadow as massive as possible, so paying life is actually upside in a deck like that, and that means this card is just all upside, and because, like Infect, Death Shadow Zoo seeks to cast a bunch of instants and on a single massive creature, like Death Shadow, for example, to kill the opponent in just a single swing, the information you gain from casting Gitaxian Probe is incredibly important. Probe even sees play in Legacy and Vintage, since it's a free spell that lets you know if your opponent is holding on to Force of Will or whatever, and it also lets you draw even more cards. At number 4, with a score of 109, I have Drown in Sorrow. Basically, the best card against aggro decks when it was both in Standard and in Theros block, because it could completely derail aggro's plans by killing all of their creatures, more or less, on turn 3, and on top of that, it also lets you scry. This card racked up a lot of appearances in control decks. At Pro Tour Journey to Nyx, at Theroblocks Pro Tour, the card was in the main board of 2 of the top 8 decks and in the sideboard of another 2 of the decks, all of them control decks. Once it shifted to Standard, it continued to pick up appearances both in mainboards and sideboards. At Pro Tour Cons of Tarkir, a Standard Pro Tour, it was in the main board of 2 of the top 8 decks and 1 of the top 8 decks at Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir as well. Again, these decks were predominantly control decks until the dominant Abzan decks of the format emerged. These decks packed powerful cards like Anafenza the Foremost and Siege Rhino, who didn't die to Drown in Sorrow themselves, and Drown in Sorrow could be used to kill smaller creatures in the aggressive decks in the format. Standard Abzan decks is where Drown in Sorrow would pick up a lot of its points. It has even shown up in Modern a little bit, picking up 2 Grand Prix top 8s in Jund decks, but it hasn't really done much in Modern since 2015, and because Anger of the Gods, another card in this list, kills a lot more things in Modern while also exiling them, it seems unlikely that Drown in Sorrow continues its run, and over time it will likely fall from this spot. At number 3, we have a card not dissimilar from Drown in Sorrow, Pyroclasm. Pyroclasm, though, has had a lot more time to build a resume and will likely continue to do so. Anytime Pyroclasm is legal in a format, you can bet it is seeing play. Why? Because it is the most efficient 2-damage sweeper in the game. It has been reprinted tons of times, allowing it to be legal in multiple standard formats. From competitive Magic's near its beginning anyway, people knew Pyroclasm was a card you wanted somewhere in your 75, and it appeared in 5 of the top 8 decks at the second Magic World Championship ever in 1995. It would continue to see play and rack up Pro Tour wins. Grand Prix didn't exist at this early stage, all the way through 1997. It had a lull between 97 and 2001, and this is mostly because, having been printed in Ice Age, it had rotated out of Standard, but it got reprinted in 7th edition, and it came back on the scene, and it never really left, as it was reprinted in 8th, 9th, 10th, Magic 2010, and Magic 2011, and it was legal in Standard for an incredibly long time because of that. However, it hasn't been legal in Standard for a while, but it was a ubiquitous sideboard card for several years while it was. It also saw play in the now defunct Extended format, and has even showed up from time to time in Legacy. Basically, any deck that has red in it, that doesn't have small creatures of its own, tends to pack a few copies of Pyroclasm in its 75, and this is still true today in Modern, though it is currently experiencing a bit of a lull because of the rise of Dredge, which has led to another card on this list, once again, Anger of the Gods, becoming more popular. That said, I think Pyroclasm will continue to see play in Modern, but can it challenge the top 2 cards on this list? At number 2, we finally break another long streak of removal. We did have Gitaxian Probe in there, and instead we have a couple more cantrips. I sort of cheated here, obviously. Serum Visions and Ponder both make the list on their own. Ponder comes in at actual number 2, and Serum Visions is more like number 6, but they're similar enough cards that I didn't want to have 2 of these very similar cards taking up slots on this top 10. What's more, the 2 cards are actually linked to some extent in Magic's history. Ponder is one of the best card draw spells in Magic, not named Brainstorm or Ancestral Recall. It has seen the most play in the powerful Legacy format, where it has accrued an obscene number of Grand Prix top 8s, picking up 5 of them just last month. It is a great card in Miracles decks there, for obvious reasons. It allows you to stack your Miracles on top of your deck and cast them for their discounted cost. And it also synergizes with the popular Delver decks in Legacy because, again, it can allow you to stack your deck to make certain you transform your Delver of Secrets. Even without the synergies, the card is great because it allows you to gain so much information and control your next several draws. It even sees play regularly in Vintage, a format where people have access to Brainstorm and Ancestral Recall. There is no doubt in my mind that Ponder is better than Serum Visions either. While it is fairly clear that this is the case, the history of the 2 cards makes it even clearer. Ponder was only legal in Modern for an incredibly short time, for 1 Pro Tour, where it appeared in 5 of the top 8 decks at Pro Tour Philadelphia in 2011. It was banned shortly after that because it made blue far too powerful of a color. It enabled decks like Pyromancer Ascension and Splinter Twin to become very near being utterly broken decks, and Modern became completely imbalanced. There was no reason not to play blue, basically. Serum Visions, actually a much older card, printed 7 years before Ponder ever was, did not have much of a resume up to this point. It appeared in a couple of top 8 standard decks way back in Worlds of 2004, but it had actually never picked up a Grand Prix or Pro Tour top 8 up to that point. An unusual distinction for cards on this list, where the cards usually saw play in formats immediately after they got printed. That's how they put up their amazing resume. What's more, though, Serum Visions never actually saw play in Modern either, not until Ponder was printed and picked up a Pro Tour top 8 at the same Pro Tour Philadelphia in 2011 in one of the Pyromancer Ascension decks. However, after Ponder and then another powerful card draw spell, Preordain, were both banned out of Modern, Serum Vision suddenly became the best card draw spell in the format. You can maybe make an argument that Gitaxian Probe is close, but I think Serum Visions is even better. Since then, it has accrued tons of Grand Prix and Pro Tour top 8s in Modern, in Delver decks, Pyromancer Ascension decks, Blue-White Control decks, and more. So basically, Serum Visions wouldn't be on this list if Ponder weren't banned in Modern, but they are. So Serum Visions is the best, and by they, I mean Preordain is also banned. So Serum Visions is the best we can do right now in Modern in terms of drawing a card and getting to control our next few draws. So what do we have at number 1? Well, I also cheated a little bit here. We have 2 cards, Thoughtseize and Duress, which are actually number 1 and 2, with both of them outscoring Ponder by a ton, almost 200 points for Duress and almost 300 points for Thoughtseize. But like Serum Visions and Ponder, I wanted to discuss them together since they do very similar things, and I didn't want to be talking about 2 different discard spells back to back. Both of these are powerful discard spells for 1 black mana that are ubiquitous across a large variety of formats, and both have benefited from being printed, reprinted, and getting multiple chances to shine in Standard, though to be fair, Duress has been printed a lot more, which is a big contributor to its incredibly high score. Let's start by talking about Duress, which is the older card of the 2. Duress was printed back in 1998, and has been reprinted a dozen times since then. If it is in Standard, it is basically a lock to see play because it is such an efficient way to disrupt the opponent, especially opponents who are playing controller combo decks. As a result, it has appeared in a variety of decks, main boards as well as sideboards, including aggressive decks, combo decks, and control decks. In Extended, it's found perhaps its most impressive success where it went along for the ride with Psychotog, which was for a time the most dominant deck in the format. But it also appeared in Reanimator decks and black-green control decks and tons of other things as well. Even Goblin decks in Standard in the mid-2000s sometimes splashed black just so they could sideboard Duress, so they could get rid of Pyroclasms and the like from the opponent's hands. There's no reason to name every single deck that Duress has appeared in a top 8 in Standard formats, though, as that would be an incredibly long video on its own. Suffice it to say that if Duress is legal in Standard and decks that run non-creature spells are prevalent, Duress is going to see play. It did as recently as the Standard format of last year. It still sees play in Modern too, with decks like Dredge and Ad Nauseam running them in the sideboard. Thoughtseize is definitely the more beloved, or hated, depending on your perspective, of these 2 cards. It was originally printed in Lorwyn, and it is arguably the most powerful discard spell in all of Magic. For 1 mana and 2 life, you can take any card but a land away from your opponent. No restrictions for 1 mana is pretty incredible, and turn 1 Thoughtseizes are one of the most groan-worthy things that can happen to a Magic player. Thoughtseize, the 2 times it was in Standard, has been completely dominant, and has been cited as some players as a reason for those Standard formats not being a whole lot of fun. Like Duress, Thoughtseize was just in every black deck of the time, although unlike Duress, people had no problem mainboarding Thoughtseize because they could hit anything. In Modern, Thoughtseize is a big part of why Jund has been so successful over the years, as the disruption it gives that deck is very important to Jund's game plan. Thoughtseize even sees heavy play in Legacy, against basically everything with black in it, Storm, Shardless Bug, Reanimator. I could go on, but again, there's no reason to. It would probably be easier to name black decks in Modern and Legacy that don't run Thoughtseize than it is to name the ones that do. Anyway, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. Next week, I'm going to come back with my picks for the opposite end of the spectrum, the worst sorceries in Magic's history. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any comments about the list, cards you think should have made it, and so forth, post them below. And if you want to make sure you catch MTG Top 10 each and every week, don't forget to subscribe. Before I sign off of this video, though, I wanted to remind you guys that my content is in part sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. There you'll be able to find articles, podcasts, and videos from a ton of great content creators, not to mention a great app if you want to practice drafting. They also have a store where you can purchase playmats and tokens from great artists. As a subscriber to my channel, you can use the discount code NEEDTOHONE5 to get a 5% discount in their store. So go check them out. Anyway, thanks for watching.